Hello, I'm Jacqueline Throop-Robinson, and I'm the author of Fire Up Your Team and the co-founder of Spark Engagement. Today on the show, we're going to talk about some great stuff. We're going to talk about corporate slavery, huh? We're going to talk about underperformance and why you shouldn't accept it and what you should do about it. We're going to talk about passion at work, that it's something that is not woo-woo, as Dov Baron likes to say, but it's something that is founded on hard science, and it's something that you can understand and you can nurture in your employees. So if you really care about the lives of your employees, their emotional lives, come and join us on this show. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
If we've been part of a system as leaders that has been crushing the creativity, the passion, the very souls of our workers, if so, if we've done it in any way at all, what can we do to do better? Well, stay tuned, because that's actually where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I am the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. You can find out more about me at dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, which is Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart and mind and soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, multi-Grammy award-winning artists. I mean, some of the folks that you would completely disagree with, you'll listen to and you'll go, wow, they're fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sink your teeth into Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you tune into podcasts. And, you know, we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get over there, rate, review, and subscribe to this show. You can also get us on what's it called? Alexa and Google Home. Just say play Dov Baron podcast. And if you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast in the world globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. So let's strip it down and dive right in. We all know the rules have changed. As we sort of potentially get our arms around this global pandemic, we need to be clear that there is no going back. There is no back in anything. It's only forward. And the pandemic has been many things that were terrible and terrifying. But as if you heard me say before, dragons leaders are born in fire. What that means is that should we decide to embrace it, the thing that could destroy us will refine us. As a result, some of the best people in your organization have been working remotely and discovered that they've been able to break the corporate chains of soul slavery. Because our people have been inadvertently freed from the cubicalization of their soul. A new dawn is here, and we must be courageous and ask ourselves, what will we do to become the bringers of that dawn? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going. You see, my guest on this episode is Jacqueline Throop-Robinson. She is the founder of Spark Engagement, Inc. She has got 20 years of research that's created a groundbreaking view of passionate work experience, including individual profiles that support every employee. As a best-selling author of Fire Up Your Team, Jacqueline focuses on inspiring individuals and leaders to pursue fulfilling and inspiring work. In fact, her book, Fire Up Your Team has been described by one of its reviewers as the most important personal development book you'll read this year. Jacqueline works globally with a wide range of clients as the director and co-creator of the only employment engagement lens that reveals the hearts and minds of your people. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome RBC Canadian Women Entrepreneur Award nominee, author of the soon-to-be-released Spark and the Future Abraham Lincoln of Freeing Corporate Slaves, Jacqueline Throop-Robinson!
Thank you, Doug. Now that is a unique introduction.
Now you're going to live up to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome. I love it. Love it.
Good. Fabulous. Now, you've created this lens through which leaders can see into the emotional lives of the people in the company.
Yes.
However, in return, you've been getting some profound insights into leaders. So, a little sidestep for a moment. Diagnostically speaking, what do you see as the state of leadership today?
Well, that's a really fascinating question, given the kind of year we have had this year. And I have seen in my client base it go one of two ways, actually. I have seen many of my CEOs really step into this challenge. And in fact, their employee engagement scores, but just you can feel it. It's a vibe, even if it's a virtual vibe, engagement is way up for these companies. Unfortunately, for a smaller number, which is good news, it's gone the other way. They've retreated. They've become fearful. They have really kind of closed in on themselves and not leaned into this. And their engagement is really struggling. And as a result, not just the teams, but at an individual level, I see a lot of tension. So it's really gone one of two ways. I think it's
polarized.
It has polarized more so than I've ever seen it in my career. And I think it's the circumstances that, people have to make a choice. You're going to go this way or that way. And it has had a profound impact on people as a result.
So in that context, and again, speaking as general leadership, so not, as any form of leadership, from the management level to the presidential level to the prime minister level to the world leader level.
Yes.
What do you think we need to do? I mean, I realize it's a complex question, but the simplicity of it, what do you think we need to do?
Honestly, I think we need to remember how to connect human to human. The leaders that have had the greatest success in my experience over the last few months now have been the ones that have been okay to say, I'm confused too. I'm not clear on where this is leading, but here's what I do know, and try to reassure, even simple things like checking in. How are you doing? Are you okay?
Yeah.
A lot of employees have been isolated as a result of this. Single professionals, really challenging to be living alone for months at a time. And the leaders that recognize that and reach out and ensure that the support is there, it has just been beautiful to watch. It's really been touching.
When the pandemic broke, and I contacted all of my leaders and I said, you're going to think about cutting back with me right now. And I understand that. And if that's what you have to do, I understand. But you need me now more than ever. Exactly. And they said, why? I said, because the time for you to step up as a human leader is right now. And they said, well, can you tell me something I can do simple, easy, quick? And I said, yeah, make a list of everybody who directly answers to you and everybody who is one step below them, and put it in your schedule that you're going to contact each one in person for a minimum of 5 minutes. And so you plan out that week and put them in. And my leader said, well, where can I fit that? And I go, doesn't matter. It's more important than anything you've got. Because if you don't create those lifelines now, emotional lifelines, your people will jump ship. They're just going to leave you. Not necessarily to go for, you were worried about them leaving for your competition. They might just go, I'm out. Right. And
Absolutely.
so I really appreciate what you're saying. That it's really important.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because one of my leaders, 40 reports, he made 15-minute meetings with every single person once a month.
There you go.
And it has turned his company around. He was struggling as a leader. He's not struggling anymore.
Because I think that leader, that label leader has been so conditioned into so many people who are in those positions to mean I'm responsible for getting shit done.
Yes.
As opposed to I'm responsible for my people. Right. And we've had these weird labels around like HR. Well, that's about people. Well, it's actually not. It's terrible. Now I speak at HR conferences and I'll say, this whole HR thing should be blown up. And they say, why? I said, because HR has become nothing more than a buffer zone for legal.
Yes.
And some of them have created separate parts of their organization around culture, which is actually about their people. But I say that the chief cultural officer actually has to be the leaders. Every leader, not one.
Yes.
I call them CROs, chief relationship officers.
Absolutely.
And so I love that you're doing that. Now I want to jump into my next question with you, which is one we ask everybody who comes on, because I think it's vitally important for people. We see all these big names, and we're often confronted with big names, and in this world where every man and his dog is, or every woman and her cat is a influencer.
Yes. Who
is somebody who's really had an impact on you and on your leadership, who we might not even know of, we may never even heard of, or maybe we have, but that's fine. But who's somebody that's really had that kind of impact on you?
The person who really has had the most impact on me was really one of my early bosses. I rose very quickly through the corporate ranks. So I was literally 25 years old with hundreds of people reporting to me. I mean, it was really crazy. At the time, I didn't think it was crazy. I felt very competent, and I thought, oh, of course I should have this job. Now I realize what a risk the organization took by putting me in that position at that age. His name's Ted Scott. He's still alive. He lives on Vancouver Island. He is this beautiful man who didn't see me as a young 25-year-old female who was just learning the ropes. He saw me as someone who could lead authentically. And he saw that in me. I learned that from my parents, actually, because I obviously didn't have leadership training at 25 years of age. But it was amazing the confidence he had in me to just allow me to be me. I remember in those days, you would type out a memo and send the memo out to your management team. And I'd sent this memo to my managers, copied him. The memo I had sent out came back to me. And at the very top corner, he had written, "I wish I could clone you, Ted."
Wow.
And that had such an impact on me that he fully accepted me. I did things very differently than my colleagues, and he just supported me. And I have tried to do the same since with anyone who works with me.
You brought up something that is very important, I think, that often leaders miss. And that is acknowledgement. When somebody writes, "I wish I could clone you" at the top of the page, it definitely doesn't mean I approve of everything you do.
No.
It's not a blanket statement of that, but it's saying, I'm acknowledging what's fantastic about you.
Yes.
And if somebody does that, and there's something you have to be pulled up on and you have to be talked to about, you're open to receiving that information.
Absolutely.
Because it's like, you're the person who wrote, "I wish I could clone you." You obviously think I'm the best thing. So if you're telling me I need to pull up my socks around this, okay, great. Help me.
Absolutely. And in fact, I always felt he had my back. So when he was supporting me, I had a lot to learn. I was 25. So when he was supporting me and course correcting me, it
Hmm.
felt like it was a collaborative effort that, and I have built this into all of my work around feedback and normalizing feedback, that if you are helping me steer my ship, because you have the experience I don't have, or you have a perspective I don't have, or you have some insight I don't have, then I'm going to welcome that feedback. I'm going to welcome that steering because you're going to help me achieve what I actually authentically want to achieve. And that's
Yeah.
what he did. That's what he did. He never did it in a way that felt punitive or undermining. One of my very, very first clients, I remember he asked me to um, train a new member of the team. And we were doing some work together, and he pulled me aside and he goes, you're making her look bad. Right? Just always undermined people and set up a competitive environment versus collaborative. It
Hmm.
was terrible, but beautiful for me to experience, though,
Because you got to see the other side.
yes, yes,
Because
that
you
is
might have
correct.
had the illusion that, well, all bosses are like, they're just like Ted.
Exactly.
No.
No, no. And it was so amazing to see how Ted could, as I said, provide you with the information or perspective you didn't have, but make you feel great about it and
Yeah.
empowered by it rather than diminished by it. And I think that is what's so important in leadership at any level, as you say, Dove. And to be able to preserve someone's human dignity when you are trying to support their growth is so important.
Yeah. And it's not as complex as people make it. It's not a balancing act. It is just like, again, it's humanity. Now, I want to come to something that is very important in the work that you're doing. According to Staff Squared HR, 85% of people hate their jobs. From your research, tell me, what are we, as in leaders today, what are we doing to our people by keeping them, if not physically, but certainly mentally, emotionally, creatively in their cubicles? What are we doing to them in this process? What's it doing to who they actually are?
I think we are not really seeing them as individuals who have aspirations and values and who want to thrive and want to contribute to something that matters. No one wants to waste 8 hours a day at work. No one. It doesn't feel good at the end of the day. If I've spent 8 hours and I don't feel I have made a contribution, I don't feel great about that. So I
No.
think I think what leaders need to understand is that employees, each and every person who works with them, wants to do meaningful work and wants to take actions that lead to a meaningful result and feels like progress. And I hear far too many leaders, not necessarily even senior leaders, could be frontline leaders,
Sure.
be disparaging. We have in our research, one of the emotional states is, um, we call it, it's a neutral state, it's a neutralized state. And many, many, many leaders will say to me, well, that's fine. Not everyone can be engaged. They're happy just doing what they do. It's just not true. It's not true. Every person starts off their career wanting to do something that will matter to someone and will make a difference somehow. And leaders stop seeing that. They give up on their people, in my view.
Yeah, you and I spoke about this last time, and it's part of everything that I do too. Is that people want to do meaningful work, but they
Yes.
also want to be understand that there's progress in it, and I want to come to that in a larger way a little bit later. But right now, you know, because I do think that's incredibly incredibly important. But what I want to talk to you about is this interesting thing for me, and this is part of the crossover between our work. People are hating their jobs. Okay. Yet we go to a party and we say, the first thing we say is, what's your name? right? Okay, now we've given the label our parents gave us. And then we say, what? What do you do?
Yeah.
Well, most people don't stand up and go, I go and spend 8 hours of misery a day for $25 an hour, or whatever the figure might be. Most people don't say that because in the world of psychology, we are identified. And so when we identify, we hold our identity to something. So we say, I'm a programmer. We say, I'm an administrator. I'm a whatever, but we don't give an emotional context to it. And which, in fact, oftentimes, if 85% of people are miserable, means that 85% of the time, most people are repressing all that down and saying, oh, I'm a coder with a plastic smile. And meanwhile, they're going to go home and slash their wrist with a spoon. So it takes a while, so it takes about 8 hours, right? So that identity wrapped in work, and people talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing with that. And,
So what I'm seeing with that is that people don't hate their jobs. They are really struggling with a facet of their work experience.
Exactly.
And so what happens is, let's just take something like, I'm a programmer.
Yeah.
Most programmers don't hate programming. I mean, you could have
Yeah.
made a poor selection and
Sure.
etc. But for the most part,
Mhm.
I become a programmer because I do love programming. Now, what I struggle with is something that is blocking, is the term we use, but blocking meaning for me, or blocking me from making the kind of progress I want to make. And we can fixate on those blockers and it can make us miserable, right?
Yes.
So part of what we do with our individual profiles is help people not fixate on the blockers, but address them. Because even if I have a very difficult manager, and I experienced this firsthand myself many years ago, it doesn't mean I have to be miserable in my job. Now,
Right.
doesn't mean that that manager doesn't have their own responsibilities and accountabilities. I'm not saying that the organization doesn't have a responsibility to ensure their leaders are, productive and humane, but we want to empower individuals to be able to influence where they can influence, because who wants to be miserable 8 hours a day? No one. No one wants that. But people do get stuck there. And sometimes people give up, right? And they just don't know what to do. So they stay kind of stuck in those negative spaces.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that, and it's part of the human condition. We globalize, and I hate my job, or I hate my husband, or I hate my wife, or I hate my kids. And of course, that's never true as a globalized statement. There are things you will like or love about it, even if you did make a wrong career choice. And sometimes, I fully agree that sometimes it's important to acknowledge that and go, yeah, you know what, I'm on the wrong career path entirely, and I need to get out. But oftentimes it is not that I hate, quote, coding, we use that as an example, because we both know that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. They leave the human, not the job, because they'll probably leave there and go code somewhere else and might be deliciously happy. But this identity attachment to the job, brings me to, have we sort of fallen into this Stockholm Syndrome with our own organizations where we, a Stockholm Syndrome where we're sort of becoming the slaves for the company? So, we sell our soul to be part of this organization so we can hold the identity, and we tell ourselves that we're in love with the corporate overlord in order to hold on to the identity. And the identity might be I'm a coder, but it might be that I'm the CEO. And it's like a Stockholm Syndrome, and in case somebody's listening, they don't know what Stockholm Syndrome is. It's where you fall in love with your captor when you've been captured and kidnapped, or you've been brutalized by them, and you fall in love with them. It's a psychological coping mechanism. Do you see that, or is it me? Am I on crack?
Well, no, I think what happens is people become very fearful of making a change that's going to leave them worse off than where they are.
Yes.
And so I think they will settle for things that are not in their best interest sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. And or they will settle for things that are fine for everyone around them. Like I meet a lot of managers who are quite happy with people just, trudging in every day, doing what they're supposed to do and trudging home. But that's very a dated concept now. If you want people to really contribute fully and to help you become more agile and to stick with you through tough times like a pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
right? You really need to be engaging all of them. And I find the leaders who are thinking about that are really genuinely looking for ways to do that. Even some of the leaders I work with who it doesn't come naturally to them, but they understand that the importance of it, and they genuinely want to support people at an individual level. I think that people just are very afraid to what, especially I will say, especially once they have financial responsibilities. I'm not
Of
talking
course.
maybe about the 25-year-old, but maybe the 45-year-old
Mm-hmm.
with children and a career. They just get very, very fearful. And they might not say that, but at the end of the day, it is fear-based, their decision to stay. Now, what we have found is if we can help people sort of think about what matters most to them and start to see the possibilities in their existing environment, I would say 8 or 9 out of 10 people can greatly improve their engagement,
Mm-hmm.
right? When they start to really think about, well, what can I do to influence and change things? How can I self-manage this in a way that serves my deep desires? I don't mean self-serving in that kind of greedy
No,
sense,
I understand.
right? I mean, in that sense of how do I make my work more meaningful? How do I ensure I am able to overcome obstacles and that are in my path that I might not even know how right now, but if I believe there are ways, there are possibilities, then I'm going to get more creative about it. I find that the vast majority of people, like well over 50%, can make significant shifts once you help give them the tools to do that.
But one of the things you're speaking about there that I think is vitally important is context and perspective.
Yes.
And I think it's one of the things that is sincerely lacking in leadership today, sincerely lacking in the world today generally. With a polarized mentality, it's very easy to say, I hate it or I love it.
Yes.
And the truth of the matter is, even psychologically speaking, if you love something, you're probably going to hate it at some point. It doesn't mean it's permanent, but it does
No.
mean, so, we've all had moments with the people that we absolutely love where we want to throw them out of the window. We have those moments. Hopefully we don't do that, but we have those moments. And then if you time travel 3 months into the future and you're having a moment of incredible love and connection to that person, you go, how did I ever hate them? And I think that that's part of the challenge, is that we're so freaking absolute. Recently I interviewed Lisa
Sorry.
Gable, who was a 4-time US president advisor. She's advised the UN. I mean, she's like a very powerful woman who's done amazing things, who's worked on both sides of the aisle. And that's her entire thing. She goes, I've worked with people I don't like at all, but I got to find where is the common ground. And I don't think we do that with ourselves. I'm not even talking about jobs or other people, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's amazing when we ask people to focus, because you talked about having specialists in neuroscience, and there's so much that relates to our work. You know,
Of course.
when we look at the neuroscience discoveries of the last, say, decade or two. But when we ask them to focus on all the aspects of their work that are meaningful to them, and it doesn't have to be grandiose. This is the thing that is
No.
so
Thank you for
interesting.
saying that.
Yes, right? You don't have to be saving lives, but you may find that just the fact that you were able to help someone make a decision quicker, maybe it's that you were able to just remove a hassle that a customer was having. I mean, it can be, you know, very small things that can still be very meaningful, and all those small things add up to a fulfilling work experience if you have enough of them. And so when we ask people to think about it genuinely, like, I don't want people to fake it, but
No.
things, you know, things that are genuinely matter to them, facets of their work, their tasks, the people they work with. And then you can just see people emotionally, they just start to feel uplifted. You can see it happening in terms of how they're speaking. And that establishes the right platform for then talking about the difference they're making and why that matters and how do they acknowledge themselves. One of and when we have a survey, it's a piece of what we do, but one of the statements on the survey is it's an I statement. I celebrate my accomplishments regularly at work. You would not believe how low that score can get.
I would entirely believe how low that is.
Right?
It's a fascinating piece. You and I talked about that last time, in that,
Yeah,
you know, it's part of one of the things we do is like, what are you doing to celebrate your people, and what are you encouraging your people to do to celebrate themselves? And
absolutely.
again, people go to the grandiosity, right? They go to the grandiosity, and so I say, you know, I go, you know, I'll put it into the simple terms. I say, what was a success today if it wasn't, even if no one else would know it, right? I was in a really bad mood, but I managed to smile and be nice to the barista. Fantastic. What did you do to celebrate that? Nothing. Why the hell not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Did you feel more like punching the barista in the head because he had a bit of attitude? Yeah. Did you do it? No. Celebrate that, because
Yeah.
that is mastery. That's your emotional evolution. That's you stepping out of not even a corporate slave, but an emotional slave to mood. And you made a choice which was
Yes.
evolutionary for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so important but we deprive ourselves of that. And so the corporate, you know, oppression that we've, you know, and I have lived in a cubicle, so
Sure.
I know what that feels like. And it can be overbearing sometimes, especially if you work in an organization where there are a lot of rules, there's a lot of regulations, compliance is demanded of you.
Yes.
You feel like you have no autonomy. I mean, it can be exhausting because it starts to feel like a weight that you're trying
Yep.
to hold up this weight. And I really think about our work as thinking about, even if things are bearing down on you, where is the space there? You know, like, it's really kind of fascinating when you think about solid matter being mostly space, right?
Mm-hmm.
I find that
Yep.
fascinating, you know, and it's
Yep.
true, but
Dark
also
matter.
as a metaphor, right? As a
Mm-hmm.
metaphor, like, I'm facing the wall. This wall feels like it's an obstacle to my progress. I cannot move forward. But if I start to think of that wall as molecules that are mostly space versus matter, it can change even how I think about the problem. And so much of how you can not feel so oppressed is to see the choices you have. You mentioned the word choice, which I think is super powerful word. It can be overused, but I really believe in the word. I think if we see our choices to not blow off steam on the barista, but to self-regulate and, you know, decide to spread joy instead, that's a choice. It's a small choice, but boy, it could be very empowering to everyone involved. So I think
Yeah.
it's important to be able to navigate what appears to be solid obstacles. They're never as solid as they appear.
Yeah, and I think that again, we have to be very, like, I know we keep reiterating, but we have to get people away from this idea of absolutes.
Yes.
And so, as a leader listening, what am I supposed to do? Make cookies for everybody? It feels like, oh my God, no.
No.
And as a person who's working at, well, what am I supposed to do? Just put up with? No, don't put up with. That's not what we're saying at all. So that's not what Jacqueline's saying. That's not what I'm saying. What we're saying is, look at what's going on. Does it break up into, is it, instead of seeing it as a whole thing, does it break up into a 100-piece jigsaw puzzle? If it does, the parts of the puzzle that are just shit, throw them out. And if it's more of that than it is of anything else, maybe this is the wrong place for you. And that's okay. And that's a good choice. Because I think that's the other thing, is to get away from the self-imposed corporate slavery, because you've got to make the choice. Like, there's great research into people who've gone to prison from being like 17 in the American system, went to jail because they had a little bag of weed on them, went to jail, spent 10 years in jail, came out, we're out for a few months, were financially broke, did something else, ended up back in jail, broke parole, and now they're 45. They're being released. They get released, and within a week they're back in.
Yeah.
Because I don't know anything else.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying about this corporate slavery idea, is that, and the Stockholm Syndrome, is we're conditioned that we just got to put up with crap, and we make it so normalized that we become part of what I would call the churn.
I think you're hitting on something super important. And I really appreciate that you called this out, because one of the things, because I do almost 100% now around employee engagement and leading engaged workforces, I am a huge advocate for dealing with underperformance,
Yes.
because you're not doing anyone a favor. No one really wants to fail, right? So if someone's failing and you're letting them fail, that's a lose-lose.
Right.
Right. So, in fact, to get people fully engaged, you got to call it, and I remember a phrase, I think it's from John Maxwell, but I'm not really sure, but care and candor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I love that phrase,
Yep.
because these are human beings. If they are failing, first of all, what's my role as a leader in that? Because chances are I've had a role to play.
Yeah.
But, how can I, with care, be straight up with them, and say what we're aspiring to, what we are trying to achieve, and where we're at today. And there's a gap. So how are we going to close that gap and not let it go? You're doing no one a favor. And when it was interesting, some of the statistics you were giving me. I remember one client, the way their year one survey went, it was sort of a third, a third, and a third. And the third of people who were not engaged, we'll just make it a big bucket
sure.
right now. We decided that we would look at why weren't they. And do you know, underperformance and poor engagement are very closely aligned.
Of course.
Right?
Yep. Makes
And
sense.
it does make sense when you think about it. So some people had been promoted too early. So we dealt with that. Some people had accepted a role that was not a fit. And no one knew, right? You don't know necessarily. But now that we know, we all know. So why don't we deal with it in a way that is a win-win? And some people left the organization, but most just needed to, we just needed to adjust within. But most organizations, once you're promoted, you don't do laterals, you don't go back. We demoted many people because it was not a fit once they had reached the level. The assessment processes were obviously wrong, but all that aside, but you know what? People who were vice presidents, went back down to directors and were happier because they were able to thrive again. But no one wanted to have those difficult conversations. Everyone was sort of pretending rather than having those authentic conversations that just say, okay, we tried it. It doesn't look like it's working. What do you think? What do you think the right solution is? Preserving everyone's dignity, though, so that, the person who was quote unquote demoted was happier. That sends a great message, right? Because their dignity was preserved.
Yeah, you brought up a very interesting point there. So, you talk about dignity, but dignity is ego, right? And we've all got egos. I've got one, you've got one, every human being's got one. Even, as I like to say, even the Dalai Lama has one. So, and egos are fragile. So if I'm the VP of, and you want to, quote, demote me to the director, that's, even though I'm a miserable bastard as the VP of, most people will choose to be a miserable bastard with a title
Yes.
than a happy person with no title. So talk to us about, how do you deal with that? Right? Because I guarantee you, the leaders you're talking to, and you're saying, listen, here's what's going on, and we need to demote some folks. They're like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, they may be miserable bastards, but they will be explosive if I do that. How do we deal with that?
Well, it's very interesting because 2 or 3 different examples popped into my mind as you were asking me the question, but each one was quite unique. So I wouldn't be able to say we did this in each case.
No.
It was very interesting. I think this is coming back to the human side, thinking about the person and what's important to them. I'll give you one example. There was a CFO who, when the company was small, I think he probably did a good job.
Sure.
But as the company grew, he didn't grow with the company, and the responsibilities got very complex. And so what the CEO did at the time is thought, you know what? He is in his zone when he is working on projects like mergers and acquisitions. He loves mergers and acquisitions. He does a great job with them. He might not be a great CFO anymore, but he is great at this and he loves it. And we know he loves it. So, and they were expanding as an organization. So there was a real role there. It wasn't anything made up. So the CFO moved into this special projects role, and they brought in a new CFO, and everyone was happy because it was viewed as, this is what this person loves to do and they're good at it. So they're playing to that strength. In another case, I think I found the theme in talking to you.
Good.
I guess it's playing to the strengths. So this VP that I had used earlier as an example, her strength was relationship management, not strategy.
Right.
So putting her in a role where she could thrive as a relationship, overseeing relationship managers, still a leadership role, but not strategic.
Right.
And I think, I do believe, though, Dov, that the conversations are very delicate because of the ego piece, and no one wants to feel like a failure. So I do believe there's a skill. I'm working with a CFO right now who's brilliant at this skill. I mean, he is just so good at helping people see their strengths and repositioning themselves and choosing to manage their own career based on their strengths. So not easy. I don't think
No.
these are, but I'll tell you what a win, because the rest of the world is watching, within the corporate world, within their company, and to see how these difficult situations are being handled is really reassuring, because if someone's struggling, people know.
Yes.
People know.
They know.
And how you're handling it as the more senior leader, whatever level that is, people are watching. And if you handle that well, and it's even if someone leaves, if it's perceived, and hopefully in reality it's a win-win, I'm telling you, loyalty goes up as a result of that. That sense of safety and security goes up. So it may be painful in the sense of it takes some time, it takes some delicacy, it takes some consideration, but I think the payoff is there, not just for the people who are intimately involved, but for the everyone who is aware and watching.
You know, our mutual friend, Jamie Mustard, the iconist, who's, of course, been a guest on this show. I was having a conversation with him yesterday, and he believes that what you've invented is the only corporately applicable sort of verifiable employee lens on earth for looking at the emotional lives of the people inside of the company, because it's easy to assume that what you've done is created as a survey that reveals stuff. But, as he points out, this is a lens that looks at the emotional lives of the people in the company.
Yes.
And he says it's the only true way, and it determines how productive, and, because you just mentioned loyalty, how productive and loyal people will be.
Yes.
Why,
Yes.
Jamie's not going to get behind a lot of things in that way. Why do you think he got so? What is it do you believe? Because you're the co-creator of this. What is it you believe that got him so on fire that's saying, let's get this into every freaking corporation there is? Because that is his mentality about it,
Yes.
right? Because, he and I have pretty heated conversations, and he's like, this has got to get out there. Like this, So why do you think that that's so, there's so much piss and vinegar about this?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. You've been talking a lot about absolutes today, and I've really enjoyed that framework for this conversation. And I think what's happened to employee engagement is the same thing. You're engaged, you're not engaged. Yeah. What does that really mean? What does it really mean? 85% of people hate their jobs, right? People are great at making headlines out of this stuff. And,
Yes.
There's obviously some truth to it. But what our lens shows is different emotional states. How are you experiencing it? Like, how does it feel to be you in this moment in time in your organization? And it's nuanced. There's more than two options, right? And so when people read their reports, they go, how I mean, this was Jamie's reaction. How did you know this? How did you know that I feel this way?
Yep.
And that's at an individual level, but at a corporate level, like for leaders to be able to actually make visible what it feels like to be their employees, just gives you a whole other way of understanding employee engagement. It's not a stat, like it's not like employee engagement isn't 75%, whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
Right. And
what I like about what you're doing with it is there's a lot of, and I get frustrated with these things. You and I talked about this before. I get frustrated with these words that are thrown around and then become part of this bullshit word salad that is thrown about as the right word to say. So the right word to say is engagement. The right word to say is innovation. The right word to say is, in this case, empathy. But what you seem to have done with this lens is given a way for leaders to have empathy as it fractions out.
Yes.
Rather than global empathy.
Yes.
And it's very difficult for human beings, and people don't understand this. I've talked about with many leaders about this, talked about this at conferences. When you say we need to be more empathetic as leaders, that's like an overwhelming statement. I can't stand Bob, and he's a dick. I'm supposed to be empathetic towards that, right? I really can't. But is that if we fraction it out, can you? And that's what you seem to have done here.
Yeah. So interesting you use that example. So one of the emotional states we call frustrated.
Sure.
Right. It's an easy one for us to talk about.
It's a euphemism for dick.
You reminded me of it when you talked about that example.
Exactly.
But so how do you become empathic with someone who's frustrated? But when you look at it through our lens, a frustrated emotional life or emotional state is that I care a lot. Meaning is super high. I wouldn't be frustrated if I didn't care. So the leader can go, okay, frustration. I can understand that that's about high meaning, high commitment, high caring. The frustration comes from wanting progress that you're not getting. So there is a hope, an expectation, a desire for a certain amount of progress in a certain amount of time, like pace of progress, maybe, or a type of progress that you're not getting. There is something stopping progress, and you're frustrated by that. So a leader can be empathic about that. Oh, they care so much. They've tried everything they can think of, but they don't know what else to do, and the obstacle is still there, so they're frustrated. I can be empathic about that. I get that. And I can help problem solve, because leaders love to problem solve.
Yeah.
So let's try to problem solve our way around this obstacle. And so the conversation isn't about, Dov, I can your behavior, your attitude isn't so good these days, right? Because that's, it's the attitude conversation. Instead, it's like, I can see you really care about this project. I feel your frustration. Talk to me about what's standing in your way. What's the obstacle that's frustrating you? How can I help? It transforms the conversation into something productive, uplifting, and human. We all get frustrated.
Of course. And I love that about the work you're doing, because as we come towards the end of the show, one of the things that I do want to touch on before we get towards the end is this access point that you've created, which is between meaning and progress.
Yes.
So in my book, Fiercely Loyal, I talked about that people want to do meaningful work.
Yes.
And if you can find a way to have them find meaning in the work, you're going to have a lot more quote engagement and innovation, etc.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, people want, again, not my opinion, it's researched, they want mastery, which means they want to have a sense of achievement and progress in that. You talk about the axis of where people can be happy in one and unhappy in another. Walk us through a little bit of that.
So what we have, well, there are a couple of ways to look at this. At the macro level, we say meaning alone is not enough. That's our statement, that having meaning in your work is, of course, essential to feeling fulfilled. I think everyone sees that, agrees with that. That's, not news. But you need to feel that your time and effort is getting you somewhere, or someone else somewhere. It doesn't even have to be you sometimes. Sometimes if someone else is benefiting, it's enough, right? But there has to be that. And so what we found with the research is that ideally, in a task, a project, a job, a career, you're able to articulate what is meaningful about it and what represents a sense of progress for you, and you can work with that. So for example, in the work we do, I care about changing lives. I do care about helping people live more fulfilling lives. What gives me that sense of progress is if I got an email yesterday from a head of operations in one of my clients, and she was just thanking me for some insights that she got this week as a result of one of our webinars. And that's a huge signal of progress for me. And to have those in everything I do, right? We all want those signals of progress, even if we have this really big vision and, big project, long-term plan. We need those little hits of progress. We need those small wins, and we need to acknowledge them and celebrate them. So at a macro level, meaning and progress always work together if you want to have these sort of exceptional work experiences.
Yes.
Now, we know that, life's not always like that. And in a day, you can have many different emotional experiences at work. I mean, frustration might happen every day, it might not, but you can be frustrated. You could be doing a task that makes you feel stagnated, and what do you do about that? So what we also look at is, how do you create enough self-awareness that you can manage the drivers of meaning for you and your drivers of progress? And it's really powerful. I know if I had had this knowledge when I was working corporately, I would not have felt so confined. I wouldn't have felt so oppressed. I just didn't have that insight at the time, and I didn't have a leader who could help me,
No.
right? That was the problem. And so I bailed. I'm one of those people you talked about earlier.
Right. Sure.
And I have people stopping me in the hallway going, "Why are you leaving?" And I just couldn't see my way forward in this organization. But now I blamed that organization. I
Sure.
did. I blamed the organization. The organization had its issues, don't get me wrong. There was work to do there, but I didn't know how to navigate it.
Right.
And that is what we hope to do. Like, yes, we do a lot of work with leaders. Only leaders who care, though. I've learned this in the journey, that there's no point in starting this work with leaders who don't genuinely care about their people, because it will not be sustainable. But the ground up piece is so important, because then everyone's working together to create an environment, a culture, as you were saying earlier, but to create an environment where we can thrive. But if you take that lens and you think about meaning and progress and what drives those, it really enables leaders to coach in a more meaningful way, give feedback in a more meaningful way, help people think it through for themselves, or teams. It works collectively. We,
Of
as you
course.
know, we have shared meaning. We have shared signals of progress. We celebrate together things that are, you know, jointly meaningful. So it can work. It's a lens that can work micro and macro.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
Jacqueline, this has been a fabulous conversation. I thank you so much for everything that you shared, and for the wisdom and insights, and for confronting things that are not often confronted and need to be confronted. There's two things I want to do before we end. One is I'm going to ask you to tell us where our listeners, our viewers, can find out more about you. And I also would like to start with asking you, I want you to imagine that somebody's listening to, watching the show, they're on the treadmill, they're doing whatever it is they're doing, and you want to get them to go away and do something to integrate this, because information is worth the hole in the donut. Transformation comes from application. What is the one thing you would want our listener, our viewer, to go away and put into action, preferably right away, but certainly within 24 hours?
I think the simplest thing people could do that will have the biggest impact is sit down and, in 2 minutes, force yourself, and that sometimes it takes forcing yourself, to
Mm-hmm.
list everything you can think of that has any bit of meaning to you in your work, and go nonstop for 2 minutes. Force yourself. What else? What else? Don't worry if it's, I just love the coffee chats with Dove. I don't care what it is. Just list everything that you can think of that has any bit of meaning to you. Um, and then also do the same with progress. List everything you can think of, learning from mistakes, hitting my goals, anything you can think of that represents progress for you. And then rank order them. Think about what really matters to me. What are those, the top 5 things? And think about how you can amplify those in your work.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's just say it is relationships. Maybe I'm making a widget that I'm not even sure how people use it, but I really love people, right?
Sure.
How can I amplify that aspect of my work day in and day out and focus on it? This is the neuroscience piece. We often say refocus on what's meaningful, reframe for progress. Because if you can keep your brain focused on the things that matter most to you, both from a meaning point of view and a progress point of view, you're going to maintain a certain level of fulfillment, and you're going to have a certain amount of resilience. We haven't talked about resilience, but this is really powerful when it comes to tough times. If you have conditioned yourself to access what is meaningful in any situation, some of it will be more grand than other times, but access what is meaningful in this moment, access the progress that we are making in this moment, because it is happening, whether you acknowledge it or not. It's there to be accessed.
Wonderful. Please tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you, your books, and all the wonderful resources you have. And of course, where they can find out about putting themselves through this lens and finding out where their organization is with it.
Well, our main website is spark-engagement.com. You can get access to all of our information there. I am active on LinkedIn, so Jacqueline Throop-Robinson at LinkedIn. And the book is on Amazon.com, Fire Up Your Team. Sparked will be out in 2021, so keep an eye out for that. But we'd love to chat with you. We love what we do.
Fabulous. Well, again, Jacqueline, it's been a pleasure and an honor. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank you for all that you've shared in the show today. It has been a real joy, a real pleasure. And I love that you are confronting the things that need to be confronted in leadership today. So thank you for that. And again, as Jacqueline said, you can find out more about her at her websites, Spark Engagement Index, I believe, .ca. Is that correct?
Yes, and .com.
And you can also you can find them on Twitter at Spark Engage Index, I believe, and even on Instagram. Yep, they've even got a couple of pieces on there too, so you can search them out in those kinds of places. It has been great having Jacqueline here, and I encourage you to go to those sites. I encourage you to find out more about how you can look through that lens at yourself and at your organization. Remember that you can chat with other conscious leaders about this episode or any of our past episodes inside of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast, because it doesn't matter how successful you are if your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning. You're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or as a leadership strategist or an executive advisor for you or your organization, you can go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com, because unified meaning, or as we like to call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness in all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about the axis that is meaning and progress. And remember that nothing is absolute. Get out of the extremes. Look to the center, not just with others, but with yourself, to see the meaning of what it is you're doing. And give yourself permission to pursue that meaning and to celebrate that success. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of focus, clarity, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.